I never thought I'd walk into the office one morning and discover that my boss had been secretly plotting against me. Yeah, sounds dramatic, right? But that's exactly what happened. Before I dive into the full story, make sure you hit subscribe, drop a like, and leave a comment, because trust me, you'll want to weigh in on this one. So, here's how it started. I'd been working at this mid-sized marketing firm for about 3 years. I wasn't the youngest employee, but I was definitely one of the hungriest. I put in long hours, took on projects other people didn't want, and genuinely cared about the results we delivered. That's probably why my manager, Rebecca, had been singing my praises during performance reviews. Or at least, I thought she had. The first red flag came when I noticed my name missing from a project update email. It was a campaign I had practically built from scratch, yet somehow, my contribution had been reduced to a footnote. At first, I shrugged it off, maybe it was just a clerical error. But then it happened again. And again. It was almost like my hard work was being erased, piece by piece. What stung most was that my coworkers started assuming I was slacking off, because Rebecca was painting a different picture in private meetings. The turning point came when one of my closest colleagues pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I don't know what's going on, but Rebecca's been telling upper management that you've been struggling. She even implied you weren't pulling your weight on the last campaign." That's when I realized, my boss wasn't just neglecting to give me credit. She was actively sabotaging me. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I mean, Rebecca had always seemed supportive, the kind of manager who sent great job emails and encouraged team bonding over after-work drinks. But the more I replayed the situation in my head, the more it clicked. She wasn't just forgetting to mention me, she was deliberately cutting me out. I tried confronting her casually. One morning, while grabbing coffee in the break room, I said, "Hey, I noticed my name wasn't included in the last project report. Just wondering if that was an oversight?" She didn't even blink. Instead, she gave me this fake smile and said, "Oh, don't worry about those little details. Everyone knows you contributed." But no, they didn't. And that was the problem. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing Rebecca forming a closer relationship with another co-worker, Dylan. Now Dylan was fine, I guess. He was competent, but nowhere near as experienced as me. Still, he somehow ended up being the one Rebecca constantly highlighted in meetings. Every success became his success, and I faded into the background. The worst part? Dylan knew. He'd give me these sideways glances during presentations, almost like he wanted to say sorry but liked the spotlight too much to give it up. It was maddening. I was doing the work, late nights, fixing client issues, even cleaning up Dylan's mistakes, and yet, Rebecca was parading him around as the team's rising star. At that point, I had two choices: stay silent and hope it worked itself out, or start collecting proof. And something inside me told me that if I didn't act soon, I'd end up being the scapegoat for something much bigger. So, I decided to play it smart. Instead of confronting Rebecca again, which clearly wouldn't get me anywhere, I started documenting everything. Every late-night email I sent, every report I drafted, every campaign strategy I built. I even started saving Slack messages where Dylan asked me for help, just so I could prove later that half the work he was taking credit for had actually come from me. At first, it felt paranoid. Like, who keeps screenshots of routine work conversations? But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining things. Rebecca was setting me up for something, and I needed to be ready. The breaking point came during a huge client pitch. I had spent weeks designing the presentation, refining the data, and rehearsing the delivery. But the morning of the meeting, Rebecca casually announced, "Dylan will be leading the presentation today. You'll just be there for support." I swear, I almost lost it right there. But I held my tongue. Dylan stood up, fumbled through my slides, and took credit for every insight I had put together. I sat in that conference room, smiling tightly, while my blood boiled. After the pitch, the client actually complimented Dylan, saying, "Great work, young man. You clearly know your stuff." And Rebecca? She just nodded proudly, like she had orchestrated the whole thing. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just office politics. This was betrayal. She was grooming Dylan to replace me, maybe even to push me out of the company entirely. But here's the twist: Rebecca had no idea that I'd been quietly keeping receipts. And I was just waiting for the right opportunity to use them. The opportunity came faster than I expected. A few weeks later, our team was prepping for another big campaign, one that had the potential to make or break our quarter. I was assigned to lead the analytics side, while Dylan was supposedly handling client communications. Simple enough, right? Except Dylan wasn't great at details. He missed deadlines, skipped client follow-ups, and sent half-finished drafts for approval. Guess who cleaned up the mess every single time? Me. I started noticing a disturbing pattern. Rebecca would publicly scold me in team meetings for delays or errors, even when those mistakes were Dylan's. Meanwhile, Dylan walked away looking blameless. The first time it happened, I thought maybe she just didn't know. The second time, I realized she knew exactly what she was doing. So, I doubled down on my documentation. Every late-night correction I made to Dylan's sloppy work? Saved. Every email Rebecca sent, twisting the narrative? Archived. At one point, I even started recording audio from team calls, just in case things escalated. And then came the kicker. Rebecca scheduled a private meeting with upper management. Only Dylan was invited. My name, once again, was left off the list. That was the final straw. I pulled aside one of the senior managers I trusted, someone who had seen me grinding for years, and I carefully explained what was happening. I didn't come in swinging accusations. Instead, I said, I'd like to share some of my work contributions that may have gone unnoticed. Then I handed over a neatly organized folder of evidence, project drafts, timestamps, emails, and Slack messages that showed exactly who had done the heavy lifting. The look on his face said it all. He hadn't expected me to come prepared, but I could tell he suddenly wasn't buying Rebecca's story anymore. A few days later, the ripple effects of my little evidence drop started to show. Management suddenly began copying me directly on high-level emails again, and I noticed that Rebecca's tone toward me shifted, slightly colder, but also more careful. It was like she sensed something was off, though she didn't know exactly what I had done. Meanwhile, Dylan strutted around the office like he owned the place. He was bragging about his exclusive meeting with the execs, conveniently leaving out the fact that half the questions they asked him, he couldn't answer without my input. I wasn't surprised. He never really understood the data side of our work. Then came the big surprise. Our VP of operations called me into his office. My stomach dropped. I half expected this to be a setup, maybe Rebecca finally convincing him that I was dead weight. But instead, he leaned back in his chair and said, I've been reviewing some of the recent projects, and I'm curious. Can you walk me through how you managed the campaign analytics last quarter? So I did. I walked him through everything, the models, the reports, the fixes I'd made to Dylan's mistakes. I didn't trash Rebecca or Dylan directly, but I made it crystal clear who had done the actual work. By the end, he just nodded slowly and said, interesting. Very interesting. That's when I realized, Rebecca's little empire was starting to crack. But here's the kicker, just when I thought I was turning the tide, Rebecca pulled her boldest move yet. And this time, it wasn't just about erasing my work. It was about destroying my reputation completely. Rebecca struck when I least expected it. One Friday afternoon, just as everyone was wrapping up for the weekend, I got a calendar invite titled, Performance Review, Urgent. It was scheduled for 5:30 p.m., after most of the office had already cleared out. My gut twisted immediately. Nothing good ever happens at a surprise review. Sure enough, I walked into the conference room to find Rebecca sitting there with two HR reps. She put on her most sympathetic face, the one she used when pretending to mentor people, and said, "We've received some concerning feedback about your recent performance." Concerning feedback? From who? Dylan? She slid a folder across the table. Inside were cherry-picked emails, selectively cropped Slack messages, and twisted summaries of errors that weren't even mine. She claimed I had missed deadlines, failed to communicate with clients, and even suggested that I had been taking credit for Dylan's work. I almost laughed at the irony. She was accusing me of the very thing she had been orchestrating. But sitting in front of HR, I realized how dangerous this was. If I hadn't been documenting everything, this could have been the end of my career. So, I stayed calm. I let her finish her little speech about professional accountability and team harmony. Then, I pulled out my laptop, connected it to the screen, and opened my evidence folder. Email timestamps. Drafts with my name on them. Slack threads where Dylan asked me for solutions. Even audio snippets of team calls where Rebecca herself acknowledged my work. The HR reps' faces shifted from skepticism to shock. Rebecca's smile faltered for the first time. And that's when I dropped the line that changed everything. "Funny, Rebecca, it almost seems like someone's been trying to set me up. Who do you think that could be?" The room went silent. You could practically hear the hum of the overhead lights. Rebecca tried to recover, laughing nervously as if I had made a joke. "Let's not get dramatic," she said quickly, "we're just here to address concerns." But the HR reps weren't smiling. One of them leaned forward and said, "These records you've shown us. They directly contradict what's in this file." Rebecca's cheeks flushed red. She stammered something about miscommunication and perception issues, but it was obvious the narrative she had so carefully built was crumbling. I kept my tone calm, almost casual, but every word was deliberate. "Look, I've never had a problem with accountability. But when my work is systematically erased, when deadlines missed by others are pinned on me, and when my contributions are credited to someone else, that's not miscommunication. That's sabotage." Dylan's name came up almost immediately. HR asked whether I thought he was complicit. I told them the truth. Dylan benefited, yes, but Rebecca was the mastermind. Dylan was just playing along because it made him look good. By the time the meeting ended, Rebecca looked rattled. She didn't have the confident smirk anymore. She gathered her things quickly and avoided eye contact as she left the room. That weekend, I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head. I finally had the upper hand, but I also knew Rebecca wasn't the type to go down quietly. If anything, she'd double down. And if Dylan felt like his golden boy status was slipping, he might turn against me too. It was clear, the office had just turned into a battlefield. The question was, who else was secretly on Rebecca's side? Monday morning proved me right. The atmosphere in the office was tense, almost electric. Rebecca avoided me completely, which was unusual considering she normally micromanaged everything I touched. Dylan, on the other hand, looked like he'd just swallowed a lemon. He barely made eye contact, and when he did, it was with this mixture of guilt and resentment. By mid-morning, a new email hit everyone's inbox: mandatory team meeting, 3 p.m. sent by Rebecca. I knew instantly it wasn't going to be pretty. When the time came, the whole team gathered in the conference room. Rebecca stood at the front, smiling way too brightly, like a politician during a scandal. She launched into a speech about team alignment, trust, and the importance of integrity in the workplace. It was obvious she was trying to regain control of the narrative. Then she dropped a bombshell. She announced that there would be a temporary restructuring of responsibilities. Dylan would be given more leadership opportunities, while I would focus on support tasks to rebalance workloads. It was a slap in the face, a public demotion without calling it one. I glanced around the room. A few coworkers looked confused, some uncomfortable. But then I caught something that made my blood run cold. One of the senior managers, the same one I had trusted with my evidence, was nodding along with Rebecca. That's when it hit me. Rebecca wasn't fighting this battle alone. She had allies higher up than I thought. And if I wanted to survive this, I'd have to expose not just her, but the entire web of manipulation she was spinning. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying that meeting, the fake smile on Rebecca's face, the smug relief on Dylan's, and the subtle nod from the senior manager I thought I could trust. Something didn't add up. Why would he side with Rebecca when the evidence was so clear? Unless he was in on it too. The next morning, I came in early. I figured if Rebecca was weaving some kind of web, there had to be a paper trail. And sure enough, digging through old shared drives and archived email threads, I stumbled on something shocking. A project proposal template, identical to one I had created months ago, but with Dylan's name listed as the author. The kicker? The metadata showed the document had been modified by Rebecca herself before being forwarded to upper management. I kept digging and found more. Client feedback surveys where my name had been manually removed. Reports where Rebecca had corrected errors that weren't errors at all, they were my insights, replaced with Dylan's initials. And then, the smoking gun, an email chain between Rebecca and that senior manager. In it, Rebecca wrote, "If we position Dylan as the lead, we can justify sidelining my name. Long term, this makes the transition smoother when we phase him out." Phase me out. Like I was just a problem to be erased. Reading that, my hands shook with anger. It wasn't just office politics anymore, it was a coordinated plan to ruin my career. I knew right then, it was time to stop playing defense. If Rebecca and her allies wanted war, I'd give them one. But I also knew I'd need to be smart. One wrong move, and they'd crush me. I decided it was time to go on the offensive. But I couldn't just storm into a meeting waving evidence around. That would make me look like the angry employee, exactly what Rebecca wanted. No, I needed strategy. First, I made copies of everything: emails, project drafts, Slack threads, even screenshots of Rebecca's manipulative messages. I organized them chronologically, highlighting each instance where she tried to rewrite history. Then, I crafted a concise narrative to present to upper management, not accusations, but facts, with clear evidence. Next, I discreetly approached another trusted manager, someone neutral, who had no reason to favor Rebecca. I said, "I've gathered evidence of a coordinated effort to sideline me. I want to ensure the right people see it before any decisions are made." They agreed to set up a formal review meeting. It was scheduled for the following Thursday. For 3 days, I kept working quietly, making sure to stay professional and focused. No mistakes, no emotional outbursts. Every little slip could have been used against me. Thursday finally arrived. The conference room was packed. HR, senior managers, Rebecca, Dylan, and a few neutral witnesses. I stayed calm as I presented everything, slide by slide. Every lie, every erased contribution, every manipulated document. I didn't raise my voice, I let the evidence speak for itself. Rebecca tried to interject a few times, but the room quickly turned on her. Dylan's smug expression vanished. HR kept flipping through emails, looking increasingly concerned. By the end of my presentation, you could feel the shift in the room, the balance of power had changed. And that's when the first real shock came, a revelation about someone I hadn't even suspected was involved in the scheme. Just as I was finishing, one of the neutral managers spoke up. "Wait a minute. These emails reference actions that go beyond just Rebecca and Dylan. Are there others involved?" I hesitated. I hadn't wanted to expose this part yet, it was bigger than I anticipated. But the evidence didn't lie. I showed the email thread linking another mid-level manager, Carla, who had been quietly approving Rebecca's manipulations and even adding her own edits to make it look like I was incompetent. The room went silent. Dylan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Rebecca's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, she looked genuinely panicked. Carla, the quiet, always smiling type, suddenly looked like she'd been caught red-handed. HR leaned in and said, "So you're saying this was a coordinated effort among multiple people to undermine one employee?" "Yes," I said firmly. "And here's the proof. Every manipulated document, every selective email, every instance of sabotage is documented. You don't have to take my word for it, the evidence speaks for itself." By the end of the meeting, it was clear that upper management was re-evaluating everything. Rebecca tried to argue, but without allies and with the evidence stacked against her, her words fell flat. Dylan looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Carla sat quietly, probably realizing her role in the plot had just been fully exposed. As I left the room, a mix of relief and adrenaline surged through me. I knew the battle wasn't entirely over, but for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was taking control. And just when I thought I'd seen it all, one of the managers pulled me aside with a look that made my stomach twist. "There's one more thing you need to know about Rebecca. About her real agenda." I followed the manager into a quiet corner of the office. His expression was grim. "You think Rebecca was just trying to sabotage you for personal gain? That's only part of it. There's something bigger going on." I froze. Bigger than this web of lies, this carefully orchestrated campaign to erase me? My mind raced. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Inside were contracts, emails, and confidential memos. It turned out Rebecca had been lobbying upper management to secure a promotion, not just for herself, but in a way that would allow her to bring in an entirely new team she could control. Essentially, she wanted to restructure the department so completely that anyone she deemed unfit, including me, would be forced out. But the kicker? She had been manipulating Dylan and Carla to create a perfect scapegoat scenario. My absence or supposed failure would have been the justification needed for her plan to succeed. She had planned this months in advance. I stared at the documents, feeling a mixture of shock, anger, and vindication. The puzzle pieces fit together perfectly. Everything, the missing credit, the false accusations, the manipulation of Dylan, it was all part of her master plan. "And now?" I asked quietly. The manager smiled slightly. "Now we have the proof. We can stop her before she does more damage. But it's up to you how public this gets. You've got a choice, quiet resolution, or making sure everyone knows the truth." For the first time, I realized the scale of the situation. This wasn't just about my reputation anymore. It was about exposing a systemic problem in the office and holding the people responsible accountable. And in that moment, I made my decision: no more hiding, no more playing defense. It was time for justice. The next few days were intense. HR quietly launched a formal investigation, and Rebecca's carefully constructed world began to unravel. She tried to maintain her facade in front of the team, but the tension was palpable. Every glance she threw my way felt desperate, calculated, like she was trying to figure out how I had uncovered everything. Dylan, who had once strutted around like a golden boy, now avoided eye contact completely. Carla was suddenly very quiet, staying at her desk and pretending to work on urgent reports no one asked for. It was fascinating to watch, the dominoes falling exactly as they should. I stayed professional, of course. No celebrations, no gloating. Every interaction was polite, efficient, and calm. I wanted to make it clear that I wasn't here to escalate drama, the evidence and facts would do the talking for me. Then came the meeting with upper management and HR. Rebecca tried one last time to spin the narrative, claiming misunderstandings and differences in perception. But every statement she made was countered by solid evidence, emails, documents, and even audio recordings showing her manipulations. By the end of the meeting, HR made it clear, Rebecca would be removed from her managerial position immediately, Dylan would no longer be in a leadership role, and Carla would face disciplinary action for her complicity. It was vindication, yes, but also a reminder of how carefully some people plan betrayal. I felt relief, satisfaction, and a strange sense of empowerment. I had survived the storm, but I had also learned the rules of the battlefield. And the best part? Seeing the office finally return to a normal, honest rhythm, free from manipulation, favoritism, and deceit, was priceless. With Rebecca removed and Dylan and Carla humbled, the office began to breathe again. The tension that had lingered for months finally lifted. Colleagues started acknowledging each other's work properly, and I no longer felt invisible in my own team. The small victories, being credited for my projects, having my input valued, felt huge after everything that had happened. I also realized something important, this experience had changed me. I had learned to stand up for myself, to document, to be strategic, and to never let anyone manipulate my professional reputation again. But more than that, I had seen the consequences of unchecked ambition and deceit. People like Rebecca can plot, manipulate, and scheme, but truth and diligence have a way of coming to the surface. Karma has its own timing. I made a point to mentor others quietly, helping them avoid the same traps I had faced. And sometimes, when I see Dylan now, fumbling with tasks he used to claim as his own, I can't help but smirk a little, not out of cruelty, but as a reminder that actions always have consequences. Workplace drama is inevitable in any office, but the way you respond makes all the difference. Standing up, staying calm, and relying on facts rather than anger is the path to turning the tables. Looking back, I'm grateful for the lesson, harsh as it was, because it taught me how to protect my career and integrity. By the time everything settled, the office had changed for the better. Rebecca had been officially removed from her managerial role, Dylan was reassigned to a position better suited to his actual skills, and Carla faced formal disciplinary action. The team, once tense and divided, began collaborating more openly and respectfully. My contributions were finally recognized, and the respect I earned felt well deserved, not handed out for appearances. The experience left me with a lasting lesson: no matter how calculated someone's betrayal might be, evidence, professionalism, and persistence can turn the tide. Standing up for yourself doesn't mean creating conflict, it means protecting your integrity while letting the truth shine through. Looking around at my colleagues now, working honestly and supporting one another, I feel a sense of satisfaction that goes beyond personal victory. It's a reminder that in the end, truth and effort always win. And to anyone watching this story unfold, if you ever find yourself in a toxic environment, document everything, trust your instincts, and never let manipulation define your career. Karma and accountability have a way of catching up to the people who think they can rewrite reality for their own gain. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and don't miss the next videos.